She had been practicing what to say for months, every word chosen carefully, every sentence built to carry the weight of a brother she would never see again. She walked to that podium, looked at the man who had ended her family, and began to speak, and he laughed, out loud, in open court. While she was still talking, a victim impact statement is the one moment in a criminal case where the family gets to speak directly to the person who destroyed their world. There are no more objections, no cross-examinations, just the truth of what was taken, spoken to the face of the person who took it. Subscribe to Frond. Every case we cover is real, source-backed and told with the respect these families deserve. Hit the bell and stay with this one, because the laugh was just the beginning. This is the case of a murder, a conviction, and a moment in a courtroom in October 2013 that became one of the most viewed sentencing videos in the history of American true crime. April 2012. A young man is shot and killed. The exact circumstances are in the court record. What matters here is what was left behind: a family, a sister who loved him, and a future that ended on an ordinary night that was supposed to be like any other. He didn't know, you never do. The last ordinary moments of a person's life always look exactly like every other moment before them, unremarkable, unguarded, and completely unprepared for what's coming. What happened next is in the court record. A gun was fired. A young man fell, and the person who pulled the trigger walked away from that street, leaving behind something that could never be undone. Somewhere that night, a phone rang in a house where everything was still ordinary, and whoever answered it became a different person the moment they heard what had happened. That is how it always arrives, without warning, without preparation, through a phone call you can't take back. When someone is murdered, the ripple doesn't stop at the grave. It moves through every birthday after that, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday that reminds you of a person who used to make Tuesdays bearable. The killer takes a life. The family loses everything that comes after it. His sister, the woman who would eventually stand at that courtroom podium. She had known him his whole life. She had grown up beside him, and now she was being asked to find words for something that language was never built to carry. Months after the shooting, an arrest was made. The man who had pulled that trigger was identified, located, and taken into custody. For the family, it was not relief. It was the beginning of a different kind of waiting. The legal system moved slowly. Months passed. Court dates came and went. The family had to hold everything together while lawyers argued over the life of the person who had ended their brothers. That is the cost nobody talks about when they talk about justice. April 2012. A young man is shot and killed. Months later, an arrest. More months. Trial proceedings. October 2013, a sentencing hearing. And inside that hearing, a moment that would be watched 13 million times. He was convicted. When the verdict came down, the family sat in that courtroom and heard the word they had been waiting for. Guilty. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. But it was something. Between the conviction and the sentencing, the family was given the opportunity to submit a victim impact statement. She chose to speak it herself, in person, looking directly at the man who had killed her brother. She wrote it and rewrote it until every word was exactly what she needed to say. The victim statement has one purpose: to make a convicted person understand what they actually took. Not the legal version of it, the human version, the day-by-day, year-by-year, this person is gone version of what they did. The morning of the sentencing, she got dressed. She picked up the pages she had written and rewritten. She got in a car, and she went to a room where she would have to stand a few feet from the person who took her brother and speak out loud the words she had been carrying since April 2012. The courtroom filled. The judge took the bench. The convicted man was brought in and seated at the defense table. The family took their seats in the gallery, and somewhere in the room, the distance between grief and indifference was about to become impossible to ignore. Her name was called. She stood up from her seat in the gallery. She walked past the bar, past the attorneys, down the center of that courtroom, and she placed her pages on the podium. Everyone in that room knew what was coming, everyone except the man at the defense table, who apparently did not think it was worth his full attention. She began to speak. Every word she had written and rewritten. every sentence she had chosen to describe what April 2012 had done to her family. The courtroom went quiet in the way courtrooms go quiet when something truly real is happening in them. Victim statements are part of the public record. What she said in substance, he was her brother. He would never be there for the milestones that were supposed to come. She had to live without him, and the man at that table had made that choice for her. And then it happened. Midway through her statement, while she was still speaking, the man at the defense table tilted his head and his shoulders began to move, and the people in that courtroom realized what they were witnessing, a convicted murderer, laughing, while the sister of his victim stood at a podium 10 feet away and described the damage he had done to her family. She did not stop. She did not turn around. She did not acknowledge what was happening at the defense table. She kept her eyes forward, and she kept speaking, because she had not finished what she came to say, and she was not going to let him take that from her, too. This moment, documented in court, captured on camera and watched 13 million times, became the defining image of the case. Not the verdict, not the sentence, the laugh, and the sister who kept speaking through it. People in the gallery had watched the entire trial. They had sat through the evidence, the arguments, the deliberation, and now they were sitting in a courtroom watching a convicted man laugh at the sister of the person he had killed. The reaction in the gallery was visible and immediate. The defense attorney, the person whose job it was to represent this man, turned toward him and intervened. Whatever was said between them at that table was not on the public record, but the result was visible. The laughter stopped. There are things that cannot be explained in courtrooms. What that laugh communicated to everyone in that room and to the 13 million people who would eventually watch it was not confusion, it was contempt, and contempt is something people remember. She finished her statement. Every word, she picked up her pages from the podium, held them in both hands for a moment, and returned to her seat. The courtroom was completely silent when she sat down. The judge had seen it. Judges see everything. He had watched a convicted man laugh during a victim's sister's statement in his courtroom. And when it was time for the judge to speak, what came out was not the measured language of a legal proceeding. It was something closer to fury held barely in check. He addressed the convicted man directly. He told him what he had just done. He told him what it meant. He told him what it said about who he was as a person. And then, before delivering the sentence, he paused. A silence that the entire courtroom felt in their bodies. The convicted man was sentenced. The details of the sentence are in the public court record. Whatever number of years the judge handed down, the family would now have to carry this for the rest of their lives, whether the man served every day or not. After the sentence was delivered, the family left that courtroom. Whatever verdict they had hoped for, whatever number had just been spoken from that bench, they walked out into the hallway, and they had to become ordinary people again in a world that had moved on without their brother in it. That laugh did not go unnoticed by the judge. In some cases, courtroom behavior during sentencing directly influences the final outcome. Judges have discretion, and how a convicted person presents themselves in those final moments matters. One moment of contempt can cost years. The courtroom footage was released publicly, and it spread. 13 million people watched it, not because they wanted to watch someone laugh, because they couldn't believe someone would laugh, because the sister at that podium represented something people recognized, someone doing the hardest possible thing with absolute dignity. People watching that footage were furious. Not at the sister, not at the system, at the laugh. Because it stripped away every pretense of remorse, every legal formality, and showed people exactly what a convicted murderer thought about the family of his victim in the rawest possible way. She walked into that courtroom knowing she would have to stand a few feet from the man who killed her brother. She walked out having done something far harder than that. She had stood there while he laughed at her, and she had kept going. That is not something you leave behind when you exit a courthouse. This is the thing about a moment like that one. The family has carried this grief every single day since April 2012, and the man at that table could not make it through a single victim statement without laughing. That is the asymmetry of what violence leaves behind. Criminal justice scholars who study victim impact statements say that their primary purpose is acknowledgement. forcing a legal proceeding to recognize that a crime had a human cost beyond what can be measured in law. She did that. She made the court acknowledge it. Whether or not the man at the table was willing to, courts can sentence, they can punish, they can hear testimony and deliver verdicts. What they cannot do is make someone feel the weight of what they did. That is beyond the law's reach. The only person in that courtroom who could feel that weight was the family who carried it in with them. This case is not the only one. Other convicted killers have laughed, smirked, or shown open contempt in courtrooms during victim statements and sentencings. Each time it happens, the footage spreads. Each time the family has to watch the world react to the worst moment of their lives going viral. Public reaction to the footage was almost entirely focused on one thing: her, the sister. The woman who stood at that podium and refused to stop. Comment sections, social media discussions, news coverage, all of it kept returning to the same observation. She was extraordinary. She demonstrated something that cannot be legislated and cannot be faked. Dignity under contempt. She stood in a room where someone laughed at the deepest grief of her life, and she continued. People recognized it. People still recognize it. 13 million views later. The convicted man serves his sentence. The family continues to live without the person they lost. The legal system closes the file, and everyone involved is left to carry the weight of a single night in April 2012 into whatever comes next, for the rest of their lives. What she did in that courtroom has been watched 13 million times because people need to see it. They need to see that grief can coexist with dignity. They need to see that you can be destroyed and still refuse to break in the room where it would be most justified to break. Before delivering the final sentence, the judge made sure the courtroom record reflected what had happened. He addressed the laughter directly on record, in open court. What a convicted person does in those final moments is entered into the permanent record of the case. The laugh is in the court record. It always will be. Long after everyone involved has lived the rest of their lives, that moment will be there, in the transcripts, in the footage, in the public record of a case that was already defined by one life taken on an ordinary night in April 2012. 13 million views. For most families, a tragedy is private. It belongs to the people in it. This family's worst moment was watched 13 million times. That is a different kind of burden, the public ownership of something that should have been only theirs to carry. In all of this, it is easy to lose sight of the person at the center. The young man who was shot in April 2012. He was someone's brother, someone's son, someone who had people who loved him enough to show up in a courtroom and stand at a podium and say so to the person who took him. And then that was gone. The ordinary morning routines, the comfortable shared spaces, the small, unremarkable moments that you only understand were remarkable once they are no longer available. A life is made of those moments, and when it ends, so does every one of them. This case is one data point in a larger story about what happens inside courtrooms at sentencing hearings. What the victim said, what the convicted did, what the judge did next, and what it means that 13 million people needed to see it. Victim impact statements became a formal part of the sentencing process in American courts after the Supreme Court's 1991 ruling in Payne v. Tennessee. Before that, families had no guaranteed right to speak. That right was hard-won, and what she did in that courtroom in 2013 is why it matters. There are two things that can happen in a courtroom at a sentencing hearing. A convicted person can face what they did, or they can refuse to. One of those choices is visible to everyone in the room. The other one happens somewhere the law can't follow. That footage was uploaded in 2013. In 2026, it is still spreading, still being shared, still being watched, still making 13 million and counting people furious about a laugh that lasted less than 10 seconds. That is how long contempt lasts when someone captures it on camera. Wherever the family is now, they are still living with April 2012. That does not change after sentencing. It does not change after the footage goes viral. The legal case closes. The grief does not. When we watch footage like this, when we share it, when we comment on it, we are participants in this family's story, whether we intend to be or not. The least we can do is understand what we're actually watching. Not a curiosity, not a spectacle, but a family doing the hardest thing anyone is ever asked to do. The laugh lasted less than 10 seconds, but in those 10 seconds, a courtroom full of people understood something that no legal argument had made clear, that the person at the defense table felt nothing, and the person at the podium felt everything. A courtroom is not built for dignity. It is built for procedure. What she brought into that room and kept there, even under contempt, was something the room was not designed to contain, and it was the most important thing anyone said in that room that day. Her name is not publicly attached to the footage in most of the coverage, which means that the 13 million people who watched her stand at that podium, most of them do not know who she is. They know what she did. They remember what they saw, but they do not know her name. The system worked. In the narrow sense, the case was investigated, a conviction was obtained, a sentence was delivered. What the system cannot do is make someone feel what they did. That is a limit the law acknowledges and lives with. The families are the ones who do not have the option of living with it. That footage has been shared continuously since 2013. Every few years it resurfaces, reaches a new audience, and makes another wave of people furious. It keeps spreading because the emotion it generates is not complicated. You watch it and you know exactly how you feel. For every family that has ever had to sit in a courtroom and watch a legal proceeding about the worst thing that ever happened to them, she told them something. You can get through it. You can get to the end of the statement. You do not have to stop just because someone laughs at your grief. When the gavel falls and the hearing ends, everyone in that room goes somewhere. The convicted goes back to a cell. The attorneys go to their offices. The judge goes home. The family carries everything that happened in that room, out into the parking lot, into their cars, and into the rest of their lives. April 2012, a shot fired on an ordinary night. October 2013, a laugh in a courtroom. And now, years later, 13 million people who weren't there carrying a small piece of what happened because a sister did not stop speaking and someone was filming and the world was watching. You watch this, which means you are now one of 13 million people who knows what happened in that courtroom. What you do with that is your own. But the sister knows this. The more people who know, the more her brother's story belongs to the record, the more it cannot simply be forgotten. She stood at a podium in October 2013. She said everything she had come to say. She did not stop when he laughed. She did not turn around. She finished, she picked up her pages, and she walked back to her seat. That is the whole story. Everything else is just what happened around it. A young man shot in April 2012. A conviction. A sentencing hearing in October 2013. A sister who did not stop. A laugh that was witnessed by 13 million people. A case that is in the permanent record. The courtroom emptied. The bailiff turned off the lights. The cameras were packed up. The case file was closed and sent to the archive. And the family drove home to a house where one more person was still not there. Somewhere a family drove home after that hearing. They walked into a house that still had that chair in it. That mug. That half-used corner of the kitchen that still carries the memory of someone who isn't there anymore. Justice does not fill those spaces. It was never designed to. This case is about a murder. It is about a conviction and a sentence. But what 13 million people remember, what you will remember, is a woman standing at a podium who would not stop speaking, and a man at a table who chose to laugh, and a room full of people who witnessed both. She stood at that podium. She said what she came to say, and when it was over, when the sentence was delivered, and the room had emptied and the lights had gone out, the podium was still there. It always is, waiting for the next person who needs it. Sources for this investigation are in the description. Public court footage, wire reporting from Yahoo News and Associated Press, and parallel case documentation. Everything you saw is drawn from the public record. This family's story is real. More than a decade after it was uploaded, that courtroom footage is still being recommended by YouTube, still reaching new viewers who had never heard of this case, still generating the same reaction in people watching it for the first time that it generated in people watching it in 2013. Across the country, other families who had sat in courtrooms and gone through the same process watched that footage. Some of them reached out publicly. They said, "I know exactly what she felt standing there. I know exactly what it costs to keep speaking when someone treats your grief like nothing. Courtrooms are not designed for public access. Most of what happens in them, most families never see from the outside. When footage escapes, when the public gets to watch what a sentencing hearing looks like, it changes something. People who had no investment in the case become witnesses to it. There is one person in that courtroom whose position was made impossible by the laugh, the defense attorney, whose job it is to represent their client, whose job it is to maintain their client's dignity in court, and whose client just laughed during a victim statement in front of a judge who was already watching. The judge's reaction was the one that mattered most in that room. Judges set the emotional temperature of a hearing. When that judge leaned forward and spoke directly to the defendant about what had just happened, the room understood that what they had witnessed was not going to pass without consequence. Contempt of court is a legal concept for a reason. What a convicted person does in the sentencing hearing is on the record. Judges have discretion. Attorneys know this. The laugh in that courtroom was not just a moral failure, it was a tactical one. She went home that night having done what she set out to do. She had said everything she came to say. She had not been stopped. She had not turned around. And now she had to go back to the world. The same world. The same house. The same absence that had been there since April 2012. Sources for this investigation are in the description. Public court footage, wire reporting, and documented public record from the case. Everything you saw is real. The family's story is real. We covered it with the respect it deserves. If this video stayed with you, hit the like button, subscribe to Frond, and tap the bell. We cover real cases, real families, real consequences. We'll see you in the next one.